On what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, I was betrayed, humiliated, and left alone at the altar. In desperation, I escaped to a forgotten corner of my childhood, my late aunt's crumbling bakery in the coastal town of Mirendale. What began as an escape turned into a rebirth. This is not just a story of heartbreak, it's a tale of flower, fire, forgiveness, and finding something far sweeter than revenge. They say weddings are supposed to be unforgettable, and mine was, just not for the reasons I imagined. The sun had just begun to rise above Lake Wellsome, casting soft gold across the estate gardens. I stood in the bridal suite surrounded by a blur of pastel gowns and perfume clouds, watching my reflection in a full-length mirror. My dress, ivory with delicate lace detailing and a hand-sewn bodice, felt like a second skin. I had imagined this day since I was 10, how I'd look, what music would play, how Jacob would smile as I walked toward him. It was supposed to be perfect. Everyone buzzed with excitement. My bridesmaids adjusted my veil, my mother teared up, and the photographers clicked away like paparazzi. But somewhere between the makeup touch-ups and the last call for champagne, I noticed something, a strange hush. A few bridesmaids exchanged glances. One even left the room to take a phone call. But no one told me anything. I assumed it was just wedding day stress. After all, nerves make people act weird. Right? Then, it was time. The music started. But only halfway through the processional. I stood at the end of the aisle with my father beside me. The guests were seated, the officiant waiting. But Jacob wasn't there. Murmurs started to spread. A few guests looked at their phones, others began whispering. I froze as someone gasped behind me. And then I saw it. A phone was passed to my cousin, then to my aunt. A video. Jacob, kissing Callie, my maid of honor, in the courtyard. Right there. Live. As if our wedding meant nothing. My stomach dropped. My heart clenched. The dream shattered with the sound of wedding bells that never rang. I didn't cry. Not right away. I think my body went into shock. Everything around me blurred, the faces, the noise, the flashes of phone cameras. I heard someone whisper, "Is this a prank?" My mother grabbed my hand, her face pale with panic. But I just stood there, a statue in lace. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. The air in that garden felt thick, like I was drowning in it. My father whispered something in my ear, but it was like he was underwater. Everyone was looking at me, waiting to see how I would react. And that's the cruel part, people love watching a woman fall apart. Especially in a white dress. Back in the bridal suite, I finally sat down. Not on the vanity chair, but on the cold floor. I pulled off my shoes and let the silence wrap around me like a shroud. Someone knocked. I didn't answer. My hands trembled as I stared at the wall, replaying the kiss I didn't see in person but would never unsee in my mind. I thought of the rehearsal dinner, how Callie toasted us with fake tears. I thought of how Jacob kissed my forehead just last night. And I thought of every time I defended them, "They're just friends," I used to say. There was no big blow up. No confrontation. No screaming. I didn't call him. I didn't look for her. I just stood up, grabbed a suitcase, stripped off the corset I could barely breathe in, and left. I left my phone behind on the vanity, the bridal bouquet still in its box, and the dress on the floor. My mother's old car was parked out back. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. It took me nearly 5 hours to reach Mirendale. I drove barefoot, still in my silk slip, with only a hoodie tossed over my shoulders. The farther I got from Bellwood, the lighter I felt, like with every mile, I was unzipping my old life and letting it fall behind me. Mirendale isn't on most maps. It's a coastal town tucked between cliffs and pine forests, with one main street and a harbor that smells of salt and fish. It's where my Aunt Margie lived, baked, and died. I hadn't been back in years. Not since we buried her and locked the doors to her beloved bakery. I pulled into town just as the clock tower struck midnight. Everything was quiet except the sea. I parked outside the bakery. The sign, the Marigold Oven, was cracked and faded, but still there, hanging with defiant charm. The windows were dusty, the front steps chipped. I rummaged through my glove box for the key I hadn't touched in 4 years. When I opened the door, the scent hit me, not fresh bread, but something deeper. Old flour. Vanilla. Time. The bakery looked like it had held its breath waiting for me. The counter was still dusted with crumbs, recipe cards pinned to a corkboard, the old mixer unplugged but standing proud. I curled up on the couch in the back room under one of Margie's blankets, the kind that smelled like old lavender and soap. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just let sleep take me like a tide pulling me under, and for the first time in days, the silence felt safe. I woke up to the scent of memory, stale sugar and sunlit flour. The kind of smell that burrows into your chest and makes you feel both heavy and light at once. The bakery was still dark, except for the amber light pouring through the cracked blinds. I sat up slowly, unsure if it had all been a dream. But the ache in my chest and the flour on my fingertips confirmed it was real. I was here. I had walked away. And somehow, I had landed in the only place that still felt like it belonged to me. The kitchen was mostly intact, aged, cluttered, but alive. Aunt Margie had always said, kitchens are like old dogs. They don't need to be pretty, just loyal. I found her old recipe journal in a drawer beside the spice rack, pages warped by time and syrup stains. Her handwriting was chaotic, her notes playful. Don't forget the nutmeg this time, genius. I flipped to the sourdough page and traced the dough instructions with my fingertip. My hands knew what to do before my mind caught up. I found a bag of flour that hadn't gone stale and began measuring without thinking. That day, I made a loaf of bread that looked like a disaster but smelled like a miracle. It was cracked, lumpy, underbaked in the center, but it was mine. I hadn't thought about Jacob once while kneading it. I hadn't replayed the betrayal, or the whispers or the pitying eyes. I had just baked. And that was something. That was enough. Mirendale is the kind of town where everyone knows your dog's name, your grandma's birthday, and whether you like jam or jelly on your toast. So when I walked into the corner grocery store to grab some eggs and coffee, I wasn't surprised. When Mrs. Elda squinted at me from behind the register and said, "Aria Calder? From the bakery?" I gave her a sheepish nod, and in seconds, she was calling over the butcher, the mail clerk, and someone's uncle. Word traveled fast. By that evening, I had 3 visitors. One brought an apple pie just in case you forgot how sweets should taste. Another came with a bag of cleaning supplies and gossip about who was now dating the mayor's cousin. Someone else just wanted to leave a note on the bakery door. "We missed your cinnamon rolls. Please come back." These people didn't ask me about the wedding. They didn't poke at my pain like vultures. They remembered me not as the runaway bride but as Margie's niece, the girl who used to sneak spoonfuls of whipped cream from the back fridge. I found comfort in the way they remembered me. Not as someone broken, not as someone to be pitted, but someone who belonged. That night, I reopened the windows and dusted off the display case. I painted the old sign a cheerful yellow and began to scrub the floors. I didn't know if I'd stay. I didn't know if I could fix everything. But for the first time, I had a reason to try. I worked through the nights, partly because the bakery needed it, and partly because I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts. I poured my heartbreak into the dough. Every swirl of a cinnamon bun was a spiral of pain I was trying to unwind. Every crack in a crust felt like a piece of my broken heart hardening. Aunt Margie used to say baking was therapy with calories. She was right. I found joy in mastering her forgotten recipes: raspberry crumble bars, rosemary focaccia, honey butter scones. Each one tasted like healing. Locals began knocking on the door before I even flipped the sign to open. One little girl, Mira, came in every morning and asked, "Is this the happy bread?" I gave her the same sunflower-shaped brioche every time, and slowly, the bakery became something more than a retreat. It was a rebirth. He first came in on a rainy Tuesday. Tall, quiet, with sleeves rolled up and flour already on his boots. "You're out of Pano chocolate," he said, pointing to the empty shelf. "That's either a crime, or business is good." I laughed. Before I could help it, his name was Theo. Turns out, he was a local woodworker who had helped Aunt Margie with repairs once upon a time. He remembered her laugh, her bad jokes, her secret stash of rum raisin cookies. He didn't ask questions. Didn't push. Just sat at the corner table every morning with black coffee and whatever I had left. He wasn't like Jacob. He didn't flatter. He didn't flirt. He noticed things, like when I swapped recipes or tried a new glaze. He offered to fix the cracked counter and even brought in old wood he salvaged from a barn to build new shelves. He didn't make me feel like I had to pretend. 6 weeks into my life at the Marigold Oven, my phone buzzed for the first time. I had left it off since the wedding, buried deep in a drawer. But something told me to check it. There were hundreds of missed calls. Messages from family. A few tabloids had picked up the scandal. Someone had posted the video of Jacob and Callie. It went viral, but there, in the middle of the chaos, was a message that made my heart stop, from Jacob. One line: "I made a mistake. Can we talk?" I stared at it, fingers numb. My heart didn't race like it used to. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad, I was just stunned. I deleted the message without replying. Business was booming. I hired Myra's older brother to help with deliveries and even started a weekend market booth. Locals began calling me Little Margie, which made me smile more than I cared to admit. I hosted a bread-making class. I started selling Aunt Margie's herbal jam again. And I began waking up before the alarm, not out of anxiety, but anticipation. One night, Theo brought over wine and 2 aprons. "You've fed the town," he said. "Now let me feed you." We baked pizzas on the old stone slab, laughing like teenagers, flour dusting his eyebrows and making me laugh so hard I cried. He didn't ask about Jacob. He only asked how I liked my crust, thin or thick. We burned the first one. But it was the best dinner I'd had in months. One slow afternoon, I was dusting off the top shelf in Aunt Margie's office when I stumbled on a box labeled Mornings and Midnights. Inside were letters, some mine from childhood, some hers to people I never knew. But one, dated 2 weeks before her death, was addressed to me: "If you ever find yourself lost, Aria, come home. The oven's always warm. The town will remember who you are, even if you forget for a while. Bake something. It helps." I sat there, holding the letter with shaking hands. She had known. Somehow, Aunt Margie always knew. Tears spilled down my face, not from sadness, but from the strange comfort of being seen. Even posthumously, I hung that letter above the register. It became a quiet compass on days when grief still lingered in the corners like flour dust that refused to be swept away. One evening, the mayor came into the bakery just as I was locking up. She smiled in that warm, political way and said, "We're revitalizing the harbor district. We want the marigold oven to be part of it, permanently." Permanently, the word echoed in my mind like a distant bell. I'd always thought of this as a pit stop, a place to lick my wounds. But now, it felt like home. Still, fear crept in. Could I commit to this life? This place? I didn't answer right away. I stood on the back porch that night, watching the sea glisten under the moonlight. Theo joined me, handing me a cup of tea. He didn't say anything, just stood beside me, and somehow, that silence gave me the courage to say yes. One morning, I heard the bakery bell ring and froze. Jacob stood at the door. He looked thinner, paler. His tie was loose, like he hadn't worn it in weeks. "Aria," he said, his voice cracking. "Please." The bakery went silent. Customers paused mid-bite. "I just need a minute," he added. Theo stood up, quietly moved toward the counter, and looked to me. "I'll handle it," I said. We stepped outside. Jacob started to speak, but I cut him off. "You made your choice. I made mine. I messed up. I thought I wanted something else. But I was wrong." "I know," I said softly. "But I'm not that woman anymore." He looked around at the painted sign, the flower boxes under the windows, the scent of bread wafting through the air. "This suits you." "It does," I said. "Because I built it. Without you." And then I walked back inside, not with drama or tears, but with peace. Running a bakery isn't always charming. The oven failed one weekend before a wedding order. A pipe burst during my first solo catering job. Mira got flour in the sugar bins and I didn't notice until 20 muffins later, but every mistake taught me something. I learned to laugh, to delegate, to pause. I began journaling again, scribbling down not just recipes but reflections. I was no longer a woman hiding from the world, I was creating something inside it. One night, Theo and I stayed late making test batches. He kissed me over a tray of failed scones, laughing when they collapsed in the middle. It wasn't a passionate, cinematic kiss. It was gentle. Familiar. It felt like beginning again. By the third month, I decided to launch something Aunt Margie had only ever dreamed of, a monthly bread and bloom brunch with live music, fresh florals, and seasonal dishes. Locals volunteered. The high school band played jazz covers. Someone brought a pet goat. It was chaos, and it was perfect. Theo carved a new sign for the storefront, "The Marigold Oven, homegrown and heart-baked." The tagline wasn't mine. It was Myra's. A food blogger passing through town wrote a glowing piece about the bakery. It went viral. Orders poured in. Tourists began showing up with cameras and big eyes. At first, I panicked. But the town rallied. Elda offered to supply more local eggs. Theo's cousin helped build new shelves. Even Mira designed menus with crayons. People weren't just coming for the food, they were coming for the story. And I finally saw it. My pain had become something beautiful, not by erasing it, but by transforming it. That night, the bakery was quiet. The ovens were off, the counters cleaned, the soft hum of the fridge the only sound in the room. I wandered upstairs to the old apartment I'd slowly made my own again. As I passed by the hallway mirror, tall, gold-framed, a little cracked in the corner, I stopped. It was the same mirror I had stared into on my wedding day, when my makeup was perfect but my heart was a storm. I remembered how I couldn't meet my own eyes then, too afraid of what they might admit. But this time was different. I stood taller. My shoulders weren't slumped from shame, and my gaze didn't dart away. The face staring back at me hadn't changed. Same freckles. Same tired eyes. But behind them, something new glowed quietly. Strength. I saw a woman who had walked through fire and come out not untouched, but remade. I ran my fingers through my hair and whispered aloud, "You didn't wait to be saved. You saved yourself." The mirror didn't show a bride anymore. It reflected a builder. A survivor. Someone who had turned a closed-down bakery into a place of healing, not just for others, but for herself. And for the first time, I smiled at my own reflection without apology. We were setting up tables for the town's spring fundraiser, a quaint little dinner hosted to support the harbor school. I was folding napkins into sloppy triangles, and Theo was wrestling with stubborn string lights. He looked over at me. Sweat on his brow, a smudge of flour still clinging to his arm from that morning's croissant batch. Then, so casually it nearly slipped past me, he said, "I know you're not looking for a savior. I'm not trying to be one. But I'd like to stay in your life. Whatever shape that takes." The world went still for a second. No theatrics. No candlelight. No grand gesture. Just him, standing in a half-lit bakery with work boots, calloused hands, and nothing but sincerity. I set the napkins down and met his eyes. "I don't need a rescue," I said. "But I wouldn't mind a partner." That night, after the last dish had been cleared and the guests had gone home, we stayed behind. The lights were dim, the floor still dusted in sugar. A slow jazz tune played faintly from the back radio. Theo held out a hand, and I took it. We danced barefoot across the bakery floor, clumsy, laughing, stepping on each other's toes. There were no rings. No promises etched in stone. Just two people who had found peace in each other's quiet company. Aunt Margie left more than recipes, she left a legacy. I spent months compiling her notes, handwritten cards, and flour-stained pages into a book. Part recipe collection, part memoir, and part love letter to a life rebuilt. I titled it Oven Light, Recipes for Rising Again. The dedication page read, "For the woman who taught me that broken things still rise." And it wasn't just about her, it was about me, too. I didn't expect much. Maybe a few sales, some kind comments from the locals. But what happened next caught me off guard. Letters. Emails. Postcards. People from all across the country wrote to me. Women left at the altar. Men rebuilding after divorce. Teens trying to cope with their parents' betrayals. Their stories were raw, tender, vulnerable. But none of them asked for advice. They asked for recipes. So I started answering. Every letter received a handwritten note from me, and a recipe. Sometimes it was for comfort food like honey cornbread. Other times it was pie crust instructions paired with a line, "Start with the flour. Then the forgiveness." Slowly, my pain became something useful. Something shared. And every time I mailed a letter back, it felt like healing, one stamp at a time. 6 months to the day after I fled my own wedding, I stood behind the glass window of the bakery, a steaming mug of tea in my hand. The sun crept over the rooftops of Mirendale, casting golden streaks across the sidewalk. The oven glowed warm. The shelves were stacked with brioche, sourdough, and flaky apricot danishes. Laughter floated in from the alley where Mira and her little crew were playing hopscotch and lines of powdered sugar they'd sneakily borrowed when I wasn't looking. I thought back to that morning when my whole world had shattered in front of a crowd. How small I had felt. How humiliated. But standing here now, 6 months later, I didn't feel broken. I felt grateful. Because the worst day of my life had become the doorway to everything I hadn't known I needed. I hadn't just escaped that day. I had chosen something better. Not a man. Not a plan. A life. A breath of peace. A second chance. And I chose it again every morning when I tied my apron strings and switched on the oven light. The woman in that mirror from months ago? She was still here. Just stronger now, and not waiting to be loved. Already loved. By herself. If you've made it this far, thank you. This story wasn't just about heartbreak, betrayal, or running away. It was about what comes after. The long, slow work of rising again. Of kneading together the pieces of yourself that someone tried to scatter. Of building something real from what was meant to break you. Maybe you're in your own kitchen right now. Maybe you're sitting in silence, trying to remember how to breathe. And if that's you, let me say this, you are not finished. You are just preheating. The oven might feel cold today, but tomorrow, it might rise. And so will you. Because healing isn't a finish line. It's a rhythm. A recipe. 1,000 tiny choices you make every single day to keep going. To keep baking. To keep believing that you are worth the effort. So go ahead. Flour your counter. Crack the eggs. Try again. I'll be right here with stories like this one, messy, real, and full of crumbs. And if you liked this journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Because sometimes, the best beginnings start with a broken batch.